we are able to share with people who have not been able to make it today. So let me introduce this first webinar, and thank you so much to everyone for joining. So we have with us today Bhargavi Davar, who is the Director of Transforming Communities for Inclusion from Global, from Prune, India. And we have with us also Parascovia Munteanu, who is a social policy expert working in Moldova, working for Keystone Moldova, but also in general for other organizations. And we have Nick Crosby, who is my co-facilitator for the European Coalition for Community Living. So this is, I will just explain for those of you whose first sort of ECCL webinar this is. With ECCL, this is an initiative of ENIL, of the European Network on Independent Living. And for now, a couple of years with Nick, we have been organizing different events, webinars, to talk about what is going on in terms of deinstitutionalization around Europe. So first we started with sharing of good practices. Then last year we talked more about who's doing what in different countries in terms of what progress are making. And this year we are putting on 5 different webinars. And at each webinar, we're going to have one good practice and one update from a country. So today we are starting with Bhargavi, who's going to talk about some work they've done in India. And then we're going to hear from Parascovia about what is going on in the Republic of Moldova. So this first webinar, our focus is on doing this deinstitutionalization in low-income countries. And we are organizing this, as you noticed, as a meeting to make it a little bit more interactive. And once we hear from Bhargavi and Parascovia, we'll open up the floor for questions. And so you can raise your hand and I will give you the word. Or if you're more comfortable, you can also write your question in the chat box and we will read it out. So this is a little bit how we're going to work. We're going to be together for an hour and a half. And yes, I'm really looking forward to hearing from Bhargavi and Parascovia today. So I suggest we start. If there is anything that comes to your mind while they're talking, please just put it into the chat box. And finally, last thing, please, if everybody can mute themselves, whoever is not speaking, that will make sure that we have good sound throughout. So without further ado, over to you, Bhargavi.
Thanks a lot, Ines. Really happy to know about your initiative, ENIL's initiative of the series of webinars. And also I want to congratulate you on the campaign on the institutionalization. It's so timely. We of course participated in it and also put it out in our networks. So my name is Bhargavi and I am located on the west of India. So I want to share a little bit about our experiences of deinstitutionalization, which actually we started this work about 4 years ago. But the active, intensive part of it happened during Corona times, because getting the permission to get into the institution, access to, the community there was so difficult to do. So I have a small presentation and I'm going to share screen now. There are too many slides, so maybe I won't go through all of them. But this is so Bapu Trust is the organization I've been associated with for many years. I founded it 20 years ago. And we see Bapu Trust as implementing the vision of the CRPD, especially Article 19, the right to live in the community. And so going directly, Bapu Trust does a number of things. TCI sees Bapu Trust these days as its implementation partner on CRPD compliant inclusion programs, which is inclusive of social disabilities as well, of course. So this project was called the Going Home Project. We've closed it by early this year, the project closed. It's called the Going Home Project for very obvious reasons. Some of the assumptions we made on the project was that full inclusion, realization of Article 19 should be an outcome of the deinstitutionalization process. By this time, we had seen and of course read about a number of examples of failures of deinstitutionalization in my country, as is the case with several other. Trans-institutionalization and re-institutionalization often goes in the name of deinstitutionalization. Just the act of people moving out of the mental hospital system is seen as deinstitutionalization, not having a vision for what happens thereafter. But for us, the vision needed to be in compliance with the CRPD, and therefore we aimed for full inclusion. Community mutuality was hoped and planned for a year or so, even before we started bringing women, getting women discharged from these places for resettling in communities, open communities outside. So there was the assumption that women will willingly move into and live within communities. And communities will accept and support the women who have lived in the institutions. At the end of this period, I have to honestly say that the second assumption was okay, it worked very well for us, but it was difficult to convince women to move into and live within open communities. These women had lived in these institutions for like a decade or more. Many of them were quite old. They had lost a sense of what a natural community outside looks like, or they were very afraid of those natural communities. By this time, they had become very much overdrugged and vegetative with psychotropic medication and other kinds of restraints and all of that. So they had no hope for a free and open life outside those institutions. Our assumption was those who stayed at the hospital longest need to be resettled soonest, sooner or soonest. These were the long stay patients. Again, our assumption faltered because the women were, as I mentioned, they were quite destroyed by the treatment received inside the institutions. Legal systems are enabled for DI to be safe. Also, community systems are enabled. Community systems where surely that assumption worked for us because we had a very broad community-based peer support and support program for persons with psychosocial disabilities, but legal systems were not safe. These were the project objectives. Broadly, we hope to bring out in 2 years' time, we hope to bring out 40 women who have recovered but are still within the regional mental hospital, Pune. And it is called a mental hospital, but it has retained the old panopticon type mental asylum structure of colonial times. So they're not in any way hospitals. They lack even the basic emergency systems. They're very bare and very much like the horrific images that you see of people inside institutions coming from the global south. Not a good place to be in at all. Designing support interventions within regional mental hospital that prepared women to exit the hospital. This was another objective. Creating networks and opportunities to enable affordable housing, livelihoods, to support independent living within open natural communities. Enable access to formal and informal support systems within communities to foster community belonging and inclusion. There could have been an objective on accessing necessary legal systems for safe exit from these hospitals. Unfortunately, those systems do not exist. We have a traditional mental health law which has existed in the country for 200 years. And we have a wide plethora of incapacity laws. So that could have been an objective, but it is not here because we knew it was impossible to change that legal system. Luckily for us in India, as it is the case for many countries in the global south, the legal machinery is not so effective in implementing the kind of law that exists. So it is possible to negotiate with individuals within the mental hospital, the superintendent, all of those people, to bring people out rather than depend on the legal system and the court process to bring people out. That's not for us as a small NGO trying to do some innovations on deinstitutionalization. That would be extraordinarily difficult and could take many years to do it through the legal system reforms. Develop mechanisms for social protection measures to enable independence, choice, and dignity while living in open communities. So you see that in the objectives, a few of them were what would happen with the institution and within the institution, but a lot more needed to happen outside the institutions. And yeah, so just wanted to share, this is the kind of communities that we work in. These are low-income communities, and we work in a vast areas of Pune, covering vast populations, something like 800,000, 10 million people we cover with psychosocial services. So to begin with, as a prerequisite, and for the last 10 years, we already had a program which was about inclusive communities. It was not about providing mental health services in a silo, but it was about inclusive communities. So this program had a number of elements to it, which I will come to in a moment. So it has a very strongly linked to development, like jobs, employment, housing, food, nutrition, social support systems, building social capital for people, who are isolated, due to the disability and due to social barriers, all of that. So we have already in place a rather old and mature community development program, which at its core has psychosocial health and well-being. And it's a fairly elaborate and well-developed program. There are about 50 people engaged with this program at different levels. Most of the people working in the program are drawn from the communities where we work. And therefore, we felt that this kind of program would be a good safety net in terms of providing support for people who are coming out from these institutions in the short term, and that we hope that in the long term, there would be community members on equal basis with others in these communities. So these were our criteria for bringing, for offering women, for inviting women to join our program. So there you have a photograph of how the institution looks, and I would say this is the best part of that institution. Duration of stay, these are women who have lived more than 3 years and considered as recovered by the hospital with no support system. So typically these were women without families, and the system has they allowed us to work with some women. They did not allow us to work with many women. So that control they kept with themselves. So we didn't have much of a choice who we helped to deinstitutionalize and to live in the community. This was part of our process. So when we say assessment, it's not psychiatric assessment or medical assessment. It's a kind of assessment about, for example, their aspiration. Do they want to come up to start that initial conversation, who we are and what we bring to the women. So that was actually quite extended because mostly the women said, no, we don't want to go out of here. We have a place to stay, otherwise we would have died on the streets. Here they give us food and at least a place to sleep. So this is good for us. And then to register those who said that they were okay, the body map is a tool we use as we are mostly arts-based therapy practitioners. We use arts for supporting people, particularly those who need alternative, augmentative communication patterns, support systems among people with psychosocial disabilities. And so we use something called a body map. It helps people to express where they are located using body as index. As I mentioned, many of them are really drugged out. And so for us, one of the biggest challenge was what we call body activation. We offered people ways of regenerating energy. This was very important. And inside the institution, we offered a number of activities, which was something like what happens outside, like going for a walk, meeting others, socializing outside the institution, gardening activities, growing your own vegetables, rejuvenating the fruit plants which were there. So we offered many activities which they could choose to participate in, which helped them to kind of connect with soil, earth, sunshine, moving, all of that. Otherwise, they were like mostly living inside the closed wards. And then we found out about their families, whether they have support systems, does anyone come to visit, all of that. We understood what is a circle of care for them within this. At least 2 or 3 people said that they have a good social system over there because they were already absorbed into the staffing of the institution. They had their support systems. They said, we don't want to go out because we're paid and we are living here, we have friends here, our network is okay, we are taken care of, all our needs are met. And so they refused to participate in the program. And then we made intervention plans for exit. What happens? So preparing community stakeholders for inclusion and creating opportunities for building social capital. So we considered this to be an important prerequisite for deinstitutionalization to be safe. We had our experience from the earlier, our Seher program, which is still continuing, where people with high support needs get to be excluded or they withdraw from communities. And we work extra, we have a neighborhood concept of working with communities. So we have this circle of care, interventions that we do with communities, not with the families or with the individuals, but we work with the communities. And we work with all kinds of stakeholders, neighbors, extended family, friends, groups close by, being the immediate support system. So we have a number of kind of packaged, I should say, ways of exchanging news about inclusion with these communities. 40% of the program goes into awareness activities. And again, we have a population-based awareness program, not specifically, it's not psycho-education for an individual or a family member. So we have broad-based, and the messages are, they start from stress and tension right up to supporting people who are going through distress, how to offer support, how to communicate, in families so that there is no escalation of, or crisis, so on and so forth. So we do a lot of those kinds of things. Where possible, we also bring in community influencers. It could be the local religious leader, it could be the local women's group, it could be the spiritual group close by, it could be, sports group. So we also bring in other stakeholders, other people who play a role in supporting persons with such social disabilities and their families. So family work is also a very large part of the work that we do. We believe that people are excluded because the families are themselves excluded due to poverty, due to caste issues, identity issues, all of that. So we tend to work with families and neighborhoods, not just with persons. So this is the kind of work that we do. This, I won't go a lot into this, but we have a dedicated program called the 8-point framework for inclusion and recovery and inclusion. And it has self-care is something that we do extensively, addressing social justice issues, nutrition, enabling social capital, providing healthcare in a comprehensive way, not just for mental health treatment, but many people in the communities have different kinds of health issues leading up to psychosocial distress. So we offer comprehensive healthcare, often using lifestyle changes or alternative therapies. And then we have support systems, individual peer support and group support systems. As I mentioned, we work extensively with families. So this is a little more about process. Some people say we just want to go back to our family. We remember, in that village, in this town, near the tree, near the police station, my brother lives there. I want us to contact him. So there's a lot of that. So many people decide to go back to their families. So then that is one part. Some people are clear that they have no family, or their families would not accept them, or they have met their family members and their family members have said that, we don't want you back. So find your own space in the world. So that's the other option. So we have both those options open. So these are the kind of things. This is one of their socialization visits. They went to a local park. They played games. They looked at nature. It's one of the biggest gardens in my city. One of the big barriers for people to come back to natural living in communities is the absence of any means, once you have lived in an institution like that, to get the domiciliary documentation required to be recognized as a citizen of the country. At every step, it's taken us now 3 years, only now a couple of them have got what we call the Aadhaar card, PAN card, so that they can go and open their own bank accounts. So having no address, or having an address which specifically mentions their detention status in the mental hospital. So these are all big barriers to cross. And again, these are legal barriers. There's very little that we could do with this. So a lot of the support work we did inside the institution was to see if there is any, awakening of a wish to live in the communities outside. So the bulk of work we did inside the institution was, based on arts-based support. Can they visualize the city, and can they imagine themselves what their lives would be there? They're like, actually going on visits, but having lots of, simulation activities, which was also fun for them to do. Taking a bus, going to the market, or buying jewelry, self-grooming. So we did a lot of those activities just to kindle the interest. Okay, let's see, I want to go out and live out there. So these are some, it's like really large number of activities that we did. As you can see, some of them are in thousands. Yeah, so this was the discharge. Discharge was a nightmare because of the legal procedures involved. Till the end, only 2 people got discharged without unconditionally. All the others were leave of absence. Again, preserving their detainee status and preventing any kind of legal approach to citizenship. And we really struggled with the system. And even though we could not negotiate this with the new Mental Health Care Act, which everybody is saying is CRPD compliant in my country, this is not CRPD compliant. And there are reservations about, new developments at the level of the World Health Organization to build on legislations like the one that we recently got in our country. It's again something to be really wary of. It just complicates legal issues for us and puts on the garb of CRPD compliance. It is not. It is a straightforward colonial mental health law with coercion at its core. So this was a nightmare. In fact, the longest time we ever took for discharging anyone was under the legal frameworks which exist in my country. Ines, I'm aware that I may have crossed my time. I mean, how much?
Go ahead, Bhargavi. Just, don't worry.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. So this was the pathway post-exit. From the mental hospital, the women were resettled in a women's community center. Some of them stayed at our rather large office because there was a support system there. And for a few days or a couple of weeks, they stayed there. By then, Corona had set in and the communities were closed. Oh my God, that was like 8 out of 10 women came out during the first wave of Corona, and it was very bad. 2 women were out there with their own resources. We could not reach them because the total lockdown. These are small low-income communities, and the police had captured these places with barricades and very high, so we could not enter and they could not exit. So that was the situation. We kept in touch on the phone. By then, they had established good social capital in the communities. They had neighbors to help them. We were able to reach food and other kind of supports to them. We were in touch with them on the phone. We found some families which were able to offer food until such time that they got everything in their homes, all the rations and everything. Independent housing was again a very big issue because there was no nationality card, there was no address proof, so they had nothing to prove who they were. And so finding independent housing in open communities was extremely difficult for us. And so I won't run through all of this. Out of the 10 women, eventually 11 women were discharged. Full discharge was not legally allowed. One person went back home after discharge, immediately after discharge. So we were able to work with 10 women on resettlement. One person passed away with corona and the hospital refused to offer any kind of assistance. Intensive care was extraordinarily difficult and expensive in private care. So we would have lost another 4 women if we had not done a lot of enormous amount of the whole organization was mobilized for crowdsourcing. So 4 women were in fact, because they were feeling liberated. These women had a lot of expectations of life in the community. And they come into a lockdown situation and did not give up, the idea that they were free people. And so exposed themselves a lot to coronavirus. And it was not their fault. I mean, they have never lived in the open communities. And the communities are high density population. Generally, Pune city, India, as you know, is high density population. To exert, that level of control is so difficult. So 4 women went back to their families and they are really happy to be back in the families. Families were happy to receive them. Finally, of the 10 women at this point, 2 women are really happy. 3 women are happy living on their own in the communities in the way the project originally envisioned it. So it raised a lot of questions for us, the corona situation and the absolute lack of support from the government, for the women who came out of those institutions. There was a rush to, so some people were shifted to some other institutions by the government. There is the beggars' home in India. There are women's shelters, which are closed door institutions. So women were just shunted, some were shunted into private institutions. So all of that continued to happen because during Corona times, there was a disaster inside the mental hospital where we worked. They shut the doors and when they opened it, they trans-institutionalized or re-institutionalized women in other spaces. And so, I won't go through this, but housing, we did manage to, I think one of the core values which sank very deep into the team is that whether housing or employment, whether corona or no corona, we are just going to be obsessive about people's choice. And that went very deep. The number of actions we took was very large, therefore, because they had to visit they had no idea of the city. They had to visit a number of places. They had to decide whether they can afford it, what kind of job they can source. We offered them many of those actions, options, and they picked what they wanted. Some chose to live with each other. Some chose to share homes. Some chose to live on their own. Some chose to go back to that community shelter, which was not an institution to that extent. It was an institution. There was a lot of control on people's lives, but it was not closed door type of institution. Women do go out to work, have their own life, all of that. So this is the kind of work that we did. Eventually, after 3 years, only now, one of the women was able to open a bank account. Again, legal barriers, not other barriers. Very well connected into their social network, very active in the social community where they are living, found jobs, they're able to manage their own income, their own living expenses. We don't have social support, social protection from our government. So they have to manage on their own. We try to, these are the schemes that we generated. We covered for some of these housing, travel, basic cost for documentation, phone and accessories. Phone was the most important, particularly during Corona times. Access to a phone was like a life and death matter. So we managed to mobilize phones, cash transfers, all of that. We expected that we should be supporting them for 6 months to a year. Some people got jobs, but mostly no, it lasted for 2 years almost. And we believe it's because of the corona situation and lack of availability of options in this time. Yeah, so I'm going to stop here and take up questions in a bit. Thank you so much, Ines, for this opportunity. Yeah.
No, thank you very much, Bhargavi. I think that was really interesting, and what you say, great work, especially considering that you haven't given up despite COVID and all the problems. Yeah, just all the difficulties that brought you. So it was really great to hear your experience. I'm just wondering, maybe we can take some, before we go to Parascovia, in case anybody has questions. I would also have a question, but let me see if anybody else, please, if you go to reactions, which is just at the bottom of the screen, you can raise your hand. And you can ask your question. I don't see anyone. You can also ask later. Okay, we have one question. This will be interesting, me pronouncing people's names. Chamali?
Yes, you're right.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm Chamali. I think Bhargavi's presentation is kind of, how do I say, inspiring presentation, because it's action project. And also I think I feel the project and the conditions very well, because I am representing Sri Lanka. So it's very similar conditions in Sri Lanka about the deinstitutionalization process and how it is very kind of a low process, and also regarding the mental health problems. So my question to you, Bhargavi, I'm interested in knowing, you said that this project considered some women. So I would like to know, all of these women were from the same community when you do this deinstitutionalization? Or let's say go back to home? And the other question, maybe I'm interested in knowing how the community reacts when they see these people. Because from my experience in Sri Lanka, still when you say somebody is having mental health issues, you know, the general community has kind of a fear that they will hit you back, you know, they will become violent. So these are the perceptions we have in our communities. I don't know, maybe Bhargavi will tell me about something more, something about India, but this is how Sri Lanka is. So it's very difficult to, you know, get people, those who are institutionalized for a long time, to the community back. And I will just share one experience, because I'm a social work student right now, doing my PhD in Ljubljana, Faculty of Social Work. So in Colombo, back in Sri Lanka, I have been a social work student, and I have been working in the mental hospital as a social work student practitioner. At that point in 2008, I remember that those who were admitted to hospital, the family members had given the wrong addresses. Though they were recovered sometimes, even the hospital administration couldn't send these people back because the addresses were wrong. So these are my experience. I would like to maybe hear something more from Bhargavi from India. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chamali, for your questions. Let's take one more question from Dorothy, and then we'll give Bhargavi a chance to reply. Dorothy, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bhargavi, for the good presentation and the work that is being done in India. For me, my question is about like, if as women are being institutionalized, they are being settled back to their families, how are you assuring that the families do not also become like institutions? Because I would give an example. There was a lady who was resettled in Uganda, and the family also seemed to become like an institution, because they were controlling her, every step of her, controlling her movements, and they could not allow her also again to go and make visits to other places because of maybe fear that maybe he will again disappear from them. And how can we support families or where the persons are being resettled not also to perpetuate characteristics of institutions? Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Bhargavi, do you want to go ahead and reply?
Yes, thank you so much, Dorothy, Chameli, and Ines. Well, I think so that, I feel that in each country, we have to retrieve our idea of what is community. For us in the global South, possibly Sri Lanka, India, it's more or less the same. High density populations, most people living in low income housing, and lots and lots of rural areas, which for me actually, I'm remembering the Special Rapporteur's report, which said that when the mental health infrastructure is low, is very low, you don't have that much of mental health service coverage, there is better opportunity for social inclusion. And to build community systems to accommodate people who are vulnerable to being excluded, underrepresented groups, people with mental, intellectual, social disabilities, all of that. And so in our communities, as I mentioned, one of the prerequisites is preparing communities for inclusion. So Bapu Trust, the implementing organization of TCI, we have been working for the last 10 years, just talking to communities on inclusion of all persons. So especially persons with mental health issues, stress, distress, high support needs, like social disabilities, all of that, the whole spectrum of what people go through, when they have mental health issues. So we've been doing that. So we went to communities which already was inclusive to that extent. So for us to bring women, and there was a dilemma whether we should disclose, they had a card which said that this is my address, I come from the mental hospital. So for rentals, it was very difficult. But mostly people did not disclose, I have to say. If they had disclosed, the situation would be very different. But then there are people, families who come into communities and they don't say, I came from Nashik, I came from, Timbuktu. They just come in and settle down. And so it was not, why would I pick myself out as special to say that I'm from the mental hospital? People don't do that. People have their own, skeletons in the cupboard, they have stories in the closet, whatever. So it's part of that. And that is community. You have that choice to disclose or not to disclose. And so there was no, of course, we protected whatever they wanted, but they built community for themselves. They made extraordinary effort to settle in. Neighbors helped them a lot. And of course, the Bapu Trust staff, many of them were living in the communities themselves, so they also helped them a lot. Yes, of course, Dorothy, family is also, could get as an institution, but we do a lot of work with families. One is that we have seen, even in the case of, it worked extensively in the case of domestic violence. And earlier we used to say that let's go to the courts, let's go to the police, let's file a complaint. But then we slowly withdrew from that active, proactive measure of taking women to the police, helping them file a complaint, all of that, because very often some things have gone wrong in family exchanges, in family relationships. They don't want to leave. This is the only option they have, and they care for their families, and family members care for them, but something has gone awry. And so we try to say, okay, see what is negotiable in that situation. So many women do want to go back, and we support by empowering families, for example, in nonviolent communications, value of relationships, empowering them to be more economically independent, even within the family system, restoring dignity, personal dignity, all of that. So we have dedicated actions on these, how to deal with this. So not saying that there are no failures, of course there are failures, but we have generally seen the strength of having family as a support system in our work. And so, yeah, in some cases where violence is very high, we mobilize the community. So we have we have community justice systems mobilized, so we have like what we call confrontation meetings. If a person with a psychosocial disability is facing active violence in the community, then we set up what we call a community justice system. There could be some influencers, we could possibly take the help of women's groups, the local religious leader, the policeman, so on and so forth. Use the threat of law and not actually, use the law. In 1 or 2 cases, we have used the law as well. Right. So, yeah, thank you so much for those questions.
So Bhargavi, just to clarify, going back to Dorothy's response, if you would be able to notice if a woman was then sort of institutionalized within her family, you would follow these women after they leave, and you would be able to intervene if that was the case.
Yeah, recently we found, we usually do that. Recently we have found that, the social workers over-engage and become intrusive, particularly with women who are deinstitutionalized, because our sense of protection of these women, particularly after 4 of them were like, they had to be rushed into emergency health care. This was our first experience with deinstitutionalization. So we felt that it was too much. So what we have done this time is to leave our numbers with the women who went back to the families, to say that if you need us, call us. So that we are not in your face. Otherwise, we were in their face all the time, somebody going off to visit them and asking them how you are. They said, oh my God. So we literally had to pull them away from, from that setup and say that, look, disengage, disengage, disengage. We are only one of the support systems, and we cannot be the all-consuming support system. We cannot dictate everything. So in fact, we became an institution. It was very clear to my staff working with the women that, hey, we are doing exactly what the mental hospital is doing. And so let's step back. So yeah, but we did keep follow up. Well, it shouldn't be a battle of who controls the women. Is it us, the Babu Trust staff, or is it their family members? It's very difficult, yeah. So, but I do think that so that's when our good practice turned into bad practice. Otherwise, we were doing very well. But when there was this emergency of corona care, there was so much of the hospitals were bad, public hospitals were bad. So people just jumped in and they did all that we could. We saved 4 lives, that was a good thing. But then the tendency to overprotect continued. So we can become institutions. Social workers can become institutions, not just family members.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Bhargavi. Well, so what I sort of take from your presentation and also these answers is that it is a long-term engagement. So it's clear you started the process for a long time before and working with communities, etc. It is a very local, even though Prune is a city, but you're able to, the place, the communities, you're able to help women. So you're not working across the whole country or, a huge area. So you're able to establish those relationships within the community. And the third perhaps is there is a lot of self-reflection from what I hear from you. So you're reassessing whether what you're doing is right, correcting, and this is what obviously everybody should be doing because everybody makes mistakes, but it's important to recognize those. So this is sort of some of my takeaways, although you've said a lot. So I would go back. I would go now to Parascovia, and then we will have still some more time in case people have questions for either of you. So now Parascovia is going to talk a little bit about the process of deinstitutionalization in the whole country of Moldova. And maybe Parascovia can explain, because we have we have an international audience. So Parascovia, you can say a little bit where Moldova is.
Okay.
But it is also one of the so-called low-income countries, let's say, in Europe. Over to you, Parascovia.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ines. Thank you for all audience that they are interested in this topic, because deinstitutionalization and social inclusion, it's about people around the world. And about me, I'm working in Moldova on DI and social inclusion since 2008, the period when the DI reform started here in Moldova. And now, during this period, I also did my PhD research on social inclusion of persons with disabilities. And the results of my presentation will be focused on midterm evaluation of the report of the national program on DI, how it was implemented for 4 years, and what we recommend to other countries, how to avoid our mistakes, and how to choose the best strategies to work and not to slow down the DI process, but to advance community living and social inclusion. And you can see a sign, Moldova for Peace. I want to ask you to take a few seconds and to send the positive and good thoughts to Ukrainian people, our neighbors, because in Ukraine, almost more than 100,000 people with disabilities now are in the institutions, and they are in a high risk in this situation. And why I started with this quota, because I let you know where is Moldova. Moldova is a small country between Ukraine and Romania. We are in the cross border between Ukraine, Russia. We as a Moldova and Ukraine, we are between Russia and between European Union. That's why for us, this period is a challenging time, and Moldova now is supporting and is working a lot by supporting refugees from Ukraine, because a lot of people are running, leaving their country because of this terrible war. But returning back to Moldova, it's a small country with 2.6 million people. The number of people with disabilities, you can see it's 180,000 persons. It's official figures, about 6%, but unofficially we know that we have more about 10% of the population are with disabilities. Because our statistic, I don't know why they didn't count the people who are staying in a residential institution, who are on the state, how to say, that in the services funded by the state, and they live in residential care. Also, there are elderly people with disabilities. Also, they are, we have no statistic in this, as that why the figures are much higher. About the people in institution, when I'm talking about institution, I mean bigger institutions to where are placed from 200 up to 500 people in one facility. And about 20%, we have about 2,000 people with disabilities in institutions, big institutions, and of them 25% are children with disabilities. And as I said, the deinstitutionalization reform started in 2008, the number of people with disabilities decreased in residential care from 2,500 people in 2008 to 2,000 people up to nowadays. Since 2020 year, where COVID started, the deinstitutionalization process has slowed significantly. I can say it stopped. It stopped already. The DI reform is not one of the priority reforms in Moldova now because of the lack of budget and lack of external technical and financial assistance. Moldova is a small country, that's why the main focus is, to be helped or supported by EU funds or other funds. Because when we started in 2008, the reform, we had the support of Open Society Foundation, like in India. And we started to pilot and to begin the DI reform in Moldova with the support of OSF and European Union. And what we did, we tried to build the environment, legal framework of environment, because we didn't have other alternative services, community-based services. We had only residential care in a big residential institutions. And we supported the government as civil society organization. Keystone Moldova, it's one big national organization. And we developed a regulatory framework for 10 types of the new community-based services. And having the money from the OSF, we piloted this new type of the services in a community. And we showed that the people with disabilities, they can live in community. We supported up to 2017 to deinstitutionalize and to discharge from the institution, big institution, 200 people. They have been deinstitutionalized in their families, but it's about 20%, almost the children. And we supported to be integrated in mainstream schools, and we facilitated the access with the universal services at community level. But in case of adults, we piloted the housing services. That means community-based services, supported living, our community homes, we are called here in Moldova. It's for people, one typical house or apartment where 2 or up to 6 people can live. They can share the room only 2 people, no more, according to the quality standards. We develop these standards not to transform, this process in a smaller institutions and so on. And we provided support to local government to develop in different regions in Moldova, in 12, but all in total we have 36, to develop houses, these small houses, where the people with intellectual disabilities have been deinstitutionalized. And those people started to have a new life in the community. About 10 people, they got married, they have now their families, and they have children. 5 families, they have children, and 2 couples have 2 children. And thanks, the children are okay, and they are integrated very well in the community. And also we provided support those people not to be also employed at community level, or if they have some severe disabilities, to facilitate the connection with the community services, community mental health centers, or daycare centers, or to have some access to once a year to rehabilitation centers and so on. And the reform went well, but we didn't have any strategy, any program on DI. And we pushed, as a civil society organization, we pushed the government to approve a policy document. And finally, we got it. In 2018, the government approved the national program on deinstitutionalization for 9 years. It's for 2018 up to 2026. But we it was a lot of debates when we as a civil society, we participated in this process. And within this policy document, the government promoted a new idea, a new model of the services, that this big residential institution, they said that they can transform from interior, from their self. And why to, the government at that time, influenced by other people, they said it's no reason to transfer the money or to contract civil society to implement this DI process. They said that it could be parallelly. And you will see in this how the system works in Moldova. We have social services funded by central government. It was before the program residential institutions, and for prevention, they funded from the central government only 10–15% of personal assistance services to communities, to local governments. And we succeeded to develop and to pilot community-based services, supported living, community homes, and also to pilot other support services at community level with the support from donors, but also the sustainability of the maintenance of these services had taken by local government. But this is not possible, to continue because they have no money, and they developed a range of services that they could afford the expenditure, not more. And we advocated that from central government, the money that they had some savings, because 200 people left the institutions. And we recommended to the government to contract this money to CSO or to local government and to continue these models. But they introduced a new one residential institution started to develop they by themselves, and to deliver community-based services. And unfortunately, I can say now, after conducting the midterm evaluation, that this model failed. Failed because, the money they spent, and why I can say because I don't see the DI process. The people, the residential institutions, and we are talking about 6 biggest institutions where 200 people are placed. Each of them, they purchased houses in communities around the institutions, and they transferred the people with the staff in communities. But the life of the people didn't change a lot because they have not discharged from the institutions. They continue to bring to those people food, and so on from the big institution. Those people are only physical transferred, you know, in these small settings, but they are not connected with community doctors, community centers, but they are continue to, if they have some health issues, they are returning back in institutions to stay for treatment, and after that. And we succeed because we saw that this mess, it couldn't continue, you know, because the money, the public money are spending, but not the good results. When we are saying about the quality and about the life of the people, about the rights of the people, and it's nothing about Article 19 in there. And we influenced through international mechanisms. The commissioners on human rights of European Commission, when came in Moldova in March 2020, we had a discussion and we discussed about the situation, and they pushed to our government to change the situation. Also, we spoke at UN as a side event when all the parties are gathering in the meetings, and when we are discussing about the CRPD. And finally, we succeed to obtain that the government accepted to make this mid-term evaluation. And I'm one of the experts, the main lead expert of this group of experts. And we conducted from September up to now this evaluation, how the DI program is implementing. And because thanks God, the ministry understood that the program is not relevant like was in 2018. And the quality of services developed by residential institutions shows an inefficient use of money and a high risk of compromising the DI concept. And people with disability are more likely transferred from big residential institutions to community-based services, but are not receiving appropriate support for living independently in community. And what were the goals of this evaluation? Evaluate, first of all, the relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, sustainability, and impact of the policy on DI. And to identify the setbacks and to develop the new scenario for improving the implementation of DI reform. And this evaluation are taking into consideration 4 years from 2018 up to 2021. And a little bit about the findings about this evaluation, talking about the relevance. I can say that the program, the policy on DI is relevant because Moldova signed association agreement, EU and Moldova, where the government committed to implement CRPD. When we are talking about CRPD, we are talking about Article 19. But together with Article 19, there are other articles that are related to DI process. Also, Moldova is part of Agenda 2030, and our government committed to leave no one behind. And now we are advocating together with people who left the residential institutions that not forgot about people with disabilities and not forgot about all the people that are staying at home, like in institutions, and to act not only on transferring people, but providing appropriate support to develop services for prevention of institutionalization and other range of services. I mean, vocational education, supported employment, and also preparing the communities not to face this resistance towards persons with disabilities, and to fight and combat discrimination. And Also, at national level, the program is relevant. Within the policy, we had six goals, but after evaluation, we found out that not all the 6 are more relevant. Because one of the goals, it was transformation of 6 residential institutions. It was relevant, but the concept was, how to say, not followed. And that's why we recommend not to go forward with this transformation, because this transformation was taken by the residential institution and central government only to buy small settings and to transfer people, to move people, and that's it. But about the treatment, about the approach, they didn't change anything. The second goal was creating the new, they assumed that 3 institutions will be closed, and instead of them, they will create new institutional bodies, like to gestionate, to administrate the community-based services. But it didn't happen, and they relied on financial support, external financial support. But nobody is committed to support this model on residential institutions. They said that this model works in Czech Republic because we have some projects here from Czech Republic. Okay, it works in Czech Republic, but not in Moldova context, unfortunately. And also the goal, prevention of institutionalization, will remain relevant for the next period. Capacity building of human resources, it was ignored, Well, the actions that was taking only with the support of civil society organization, but not from public budget. But human resources is one of the key pillars for the DI process. Monitoring and evaluation of the rights of the persons with disabilities, it's not relevant, but because it was reached, it's only one objective. When we have the results, the hotline service was established, the money from state budget, the people have the rights to complain about their rights and so on. Also, we have ombudsman, the mechanism of monitoring under the ombudsman office and other mechanisms. And raising awareness, yes, it remains, because also, like Jamil said, in Sri Lanka, we also face a lot of discrimination, fear of people with mental health and people with intellectual disabilities. Talking about effectiveness of the actions planned for this period that we evaluated, you can see that only 13% of the actions planned for this period was completed. 30% are ongoing, but at the very at the beginning, I can say, and uncompleted are more than 50%. That means that the program is not effective, and we need to change. About the program efficiency, we are talking about the money. You can see the figures in million lays, but I put the percent to have this clear vision. We have in blue the planned resources, and in orange, let's say, it's the expanded expenditure for the actions. We didn't achieve 50%, and it's a pity. Those money, they didn't, the government didn't discharge from the public budget because they found, a lot of reasons. because the reform doesn't work. We need to wait and to see what will happen and so on. And they spend the money, all the public money they spend in an inefficiency way. And we have a small progress in 2019, 2020. And I will say why. Because here in Moldova, I coordinated a big project funded by EU on supporting civil society to develop social services for all vulnerable groups. And we promoted under the project, and we convinced 10 organizations from 30 to apply projects and to build partnership with residential institutions and to contribute on DI program. Why? Because the institutions bought houses and stopped. No other steps, you know, no, they needed some money for some adaptation within the houses, for endowment, for connection, and for all these, you know, utilities. They needed additional money, and they stayed and waited when the budget will be changed. And it was a long process, and they didn't, how to say, they had no interest, you know, to work and to be involved in this. And together with these 10 organizations, local organizations, we pushed them. We pushed to spend their money, and we contributed on capacity building, with furniture, how to endow, and with preparation, the transition period of the persons from institutional care to communities. And that's why. But in 2020, the project ended, and again, you know, this slowed down. And also it was, even in 2020, we had this pandemic, we had, you know, the strategy, we had this money from European Union, and we pushed and we succeeded to advance the implementation. But now nothing is happened. That means that the program is not efficient, because we I didn't show you, because it's about, you know, local expenditure, but the results show that they spend the money in inefficient way, unfortunately. And about the sustainability, we provided a poll with mayors at communities where they have or not have. About 200 of mayors answered to other poll about the program sustainability, how the mayors, the local government, are seeing these services in their communities, you know. And we asked about the program sustainability, the DI program, and more than 50% they said that there are no sustainability, because they saw that these persons, they are acting separately and not connected with their communities. And we had cases when it was resistant on behalf of the both parts, but we had open communities when they went to help, to support, but nobody asked their support, unfortunately. And about the DI program, I can say that talking about the DI program impact, it's a huge impact of individual level. The persons have a meaningful life in the community if the support is planned in appropriate way, and if the DI process is not compromised, but it's followed based on human rights approach. At community level, people and communities become more tolerant and support persons with disabilities to be included into community, because the persons that we supported before the program, you know, it's about 200 people in 14 houses. They now live a meaningful life in a community, and the community changed a lot. The government understood that the DI reform cannot be implemented by residential institutions. Finally, they understood. Community-based services should operate separate from residential care. And lesson learned from Moldova can prevent some gaps on implementation of the DI program in other countries. You know, because these models can work in other countries, but not in all. In our country failed, unfortunately. And the lesson learned, community-based services developed by residential institutions could compromise the concept of DI. It's very important, and living independently. The meaning of this, of Article 19, the success of DI policy depends on strong coordination mechanisms and participation of persons with disabilities as DI promoters at all levels. DI program should be coordinated with mental health programs, child protection programs, gender-based violence programs, estate market, labor market, and policy. Because you need to be, the DI policy needs to be coordinated. In community-based services developed by residential institutions, persons with disabilities are not receiving appropriate support for living independently. The positive models I said already from different countries could not work in our country if it's not prepared the environment, at least. And what are the next steps in our country? We recommended, but unfortunately we postponed the discussions. The first discussion, you are the first public for the results, you know, of this evaluation report, because we postponed. We needed to head on them this week, but because of this situation in Moldova with refugees, we postponed the event. But Moldova needs to have a new program. It's not the reason to change something. We understood that we need to have a new program. And we need parallelly to find the solution to transfer of 29 houses from residential institution to local authorities or to local CSO to run the services. Other way, they are in a high risk. I have the information that 2 of these houses now are empty, unfortunately. The people return back in residential institution. Diversifying and implementing different models of community-based services based on human rights-based approach, and to have the choice to contract private or public services, you know, not only to focus on public services. And living our vision, you know, it's living independently and being included in the community according to general comments on Article 19 and based on human rights approach, because otherwise it's not DI, but it's only the transfer. And I will end my presentation with a quote from Marcello Lemnaru. He's a young man, self-advocate now, but he lived 20 years well in institutions, in different institutions. And now he is living in supported living services with other 3 young men. And he said that I wish that public authority would not pay attention to DI and social inclusion only on the International Day of the Persons with Disabilities, but also throughout the year. I believe that persons with disability will become more engaged in advocating for their rights to meaningful support to live in the community and fight against being placed in institutions. I let you know that Marcel was one of the member of my team on evaluation, because he knows better than I know about the DI process. Thank you very much, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much, Parascovia. And it's great to be the first to hear the results of your midterm review. I would just say, before I give Nick has a question, but I just wanted to say that I think, you know, this what you said, what you found, that transformation run by institutions generally does not lead to independent living anywhere, but very few countries actually conduct any sort of independent reviews of the process, like you said. So when they say, you know, it works in their country, you have to question who says that it works. You know, it's usually the same institutions who say that it works. So it's great if you got actually a positive, if the government accepted your findings. And the other bit, I think it was quite different from what happens in a lot of European countries, and what Bhargavi was describing is letting people choose between where they want to live. You know, it's usually really the one option that is provided to people, and that's it. And you know, once these houses are built, most of the time, well, it's impossible to get rid of them as well. So I had to say that. Sorry, Nick. Now I'll let you ask the question.
Well, you've said some of the things I was going to mention or follow up on. I thought it was really interesting hearing the success that comes from Bhargavi's story about working with communities and kind of really investing in the community and inclusion, and the difference when residential institutions try and run the show and it fails because it doesn't. So I just thought it was really interesting, the two stories. One, if you want success, get into the community, and if you want failure, ask the institution to sort it out. And I was on a call with colleagues in Slovenia this morning, and exactly the same thing was happening there. And I don't think they'll mind me mentioning the fact that the institutions there have built new homes, and they're just mini institutions really, and it's the same thing. So if institutions, the message is really clear: if institutions are in the lead, don't do it. It won't happen. If communities are, gosh, there's loads of people suddenly arriving. So many things to follow up on. I think the interesting one was, you mentioned, and this is a question to both of you, because it worked in the Czech Republic, didn't mean it would work in Moldova. But if you had one bit of advice from your work with transforming communities for inclusion, Bhargavi, and your work in Moldova, that you think would work anywhere in the world, what would the two bits that you highlight be? So something that you've pretty much got confidence would work somewhere else.
Thanks, Nick. Parascovia, do you want to start?
Yes, of course. I can say that Moldova had a good progress on the DI up to this program, you know, started, and when introduced this new model. Before, we had success because we started to work with the people, and we work with preparation of the community, and we had this whole approach, you know, on inclusion. But and the government on the other side, I assume that they said it's not so difficult, it's easy to make the institutionalization, you know, to follow. And also we faced a lot of resistance on behalf of residential staff. And when we tried to convince at the phase of development of the DI program that is not a good model, we need to follow that works in Moldova. They said, okay, this is a temporary strategy to have them like our allies and our, partners, and to avoid this resistance. Okay, they convinced us but it was a high risk, and it happened that we assumed at that time. They became partners, but only on the way that they have had interest, to look for the buildings, houses, to purchase the buildings and so on, to spend some money. And I assume that they had some interest in this and so on, and not more. And now this temporary, we ask to stop because we cannot follow. And I will choose the preparation of community and to involve people from residential institution, but be carefully how to involve, and not to transfer practices, not to transfer their knowledges, because they, maybe in other countries they have knowledges, but in our country, no. They are treating the people based on medical approach and so on. And I will be carefully.
Thank you, Parascovia. Bhargavi, do you want to say your bit?
Yes, thank you so much, Ines, and also Nick. Well, I think that for me, there are two universals. One is removing certain universal barriers for inclusion, and those tend to be legal barriers. The hardest part of our work on deinstitutionalization is the government set up so many legal barriers. And in my country, wherever there's a mental health law, those barriers are very old, and those barriers need to be dismantled, whether they are legal incapacity laws or they are mental health laws. Don't make new mental health laws. Don't invest in mental health legislation and all the regulatory mechanism that needs to be put in place to uphold this law. Don't create new frameworks for mental health legislation. It's not going to work. Because these are barriers recognized as such by many United Nations documents. The work of the CRPD committee is exemplary in highlighting the universal barriers set up by mental health legislations. So this is one. The other is universal facilitatory factors, and I completely agree with Parascovia, and knowing the work of ENIL, I think many of us are gathered in this opinion together to say that community support systems is a universal facilitatory aspect of deinstitutionalization. There has to be, we have to transform communities towards inclusion. And I don't think it's an extraordinary effort in this regard. We use the concept of circle of care, where we take the concept of inclusion and the practice of inclusion, trainings in inclusion, dialogues on inclusion, community justice systems on inclusion. We do so many actions in the name of circle of care. And I think in one form or the other throughout the world, whichever country we are located in, there is a circle of care. There is an idea that we all need to support each other. So I was privileged to be working in the Baku Trust to create, I think, one of the largest support systems in the Asia Pacific region. We have a vast population coverage, and and I think this is possible worldwide. And many of us are just struggling to establish this and facing barriers along the way. Yeah. So for me, community support systems and circles of care is the key to deinstitutionalization. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bhargavi. For those people who joined us recently, we are almost at the end. You might have gotten the time zones mixed up. I'm sorry, I'm often doing that myself, but we will share the recording. If it's okay with you, Bhargavi, Parascovia, can we take just one last question from Zukiswa? Zukiswa, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm one of the people who joined late because of the time zones. So, Shu, just like the previous speaker, the previous gentleman, I also found that there's a lot that I would love to unpack, but I understand that we've almost run out of time. So I will try to prioritize my questions. So I'm just curious, first of all, as to what led to this DI program. Did some kind of advocacy play a role at all in all of this? What led to this? How did this program come about? And if there was some advocacy, what was that advocacy role? That's the one question. Can I ask a couple more, or just wait for a response?
Maybe ask them, but yeah, we will share the recording as well, so that might help. But you can go ahead and ask all your questions, and then we can ask.
Okay, so that was my first question. And then I also wanted to understand what was the role of persons with disabilities in implementation. And because also the speaker mentioned quite a few times that we did this, we did that in the implementation. So I just wanted to get an indication of who did that entail and what was the role of people with disabilities. And then the third question, I know the project was targeting, or my understanding is that it was targeting disabled people, but I just wondered, because the speaker mentioned that the states in Moldova don't take into account people who are aging with disability. So I wanted to know did this program include people who are aging with disability? And yeah, what were the observations amongst people with disabilities and those aging with disabilities throughout the program? Were there any differences if that was taken into account? Though I take note that the project objectives were not targeting that population. And then you mentioned the post the evaluation, you are now continuing with advocacy. I'm interested in that advocacy. What methods of advocacy are you using? You know, you said that post this evaluation, there's some advocacy that you're continuing to do. I didn't quite get what was that advocacy about and what methods are you using in that advocacy. Also, you gave us an outline of the effectiveness and the efficiency. Maybe you mentioned it, and I'm sorry if you did. I got the efficiency quite well, but I wanted to understand what were the indicators of the effectiveness that you spoke to. How did you measure the effectiveness? And then lastly, it probably was dealt with, and I'm sorry again because I was late. I just wondered, before the program started, did you take into account at all the independent living principles? And is there a difference at all with this program, you know, to independent living movement and its principles? That was quite a mouthful.
Thank you, Zaki. So I take it these are questions for Parascovia, and well, if you can try Parascovia to answer. Somebody also asked for the full report, so maybe you can mention if that is actually. That was you. Yeah. In case that is available, maybe it's a good idea to share it. And before you start answering Parascovia, maybe we can also share contact details so people can get in touch and, you know, ask for more details. So yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, I will let Ines, and you can share with my contacts, but the report is not yet public one because we need to discuss with the government. I asked the permission from the donors. It was the German government supported this evaluation, and they were okay to speak at this event about this report, but not, I don't know the government, you know, but the report is now, it's only in Romanian. Summary of the report could be in English, and if could be, we will share, but this presentation of course will be shared. What about this DI program? DI program, it's a national policy that shows how the government, our national government, is implementing the CRPD in practice related to deinstitutionalization and social inclusion. I mean the Article 19. And this means from where it's coordination between external you know, external technical and financial support, and also the contribution of our government, because they are committed to do something and how to implement and to report how they are implementing CRPD. Also, it's a coordination among all the actors, stakeholders that act in our country on DI and social inclusion, and to have a common approach about independent principles, about human rights-based approach, about leave no one behind. What does mean, you know? And also about social role valorization, about people, and about the disability models. Because some organizations, unfortunately, I can say, that are promoting the medical approach of disabilities that is not committed to CRPD. And what is the role of the persons with disabilities? It's a huge role, you know, because we and me as a civil activist, you know, NDI, I involve a lot people that live the experience. And when I have some presentation to do about the community living, about why is needed in this community to develop services and so on, I will talk, but you know, the local government or other stakeholders can trust me. But a person who lived 30 years or 40 years in institutions, and they know how they have been violated, deprived of rights, and how they stayed isolated, labor exploitation, and so on, it's another meaning. And when they start to discuss how their life changed when they moved in community and they started a new life. And this is more powerful. And we, as a civil society organization, we use a lot this practice, and we engaged as a peer support and as a peer consultant. You know, we are hiring people as a consultancy to provide consultancy work for our organization or for other, you know, and to be part of the process. Because they are ideas, and we are discussing all the issue with them. This is and about the advocacy tools. We are using different advocacy tools, starting with at international level, regional level, and at national. We involve persons who lived and left residential care to speak at the high level at UN committee, at conferences that provide in New York in each year, UN side conference of state parties who ratify the convention. And we are engaging and supporting people to speak and advocating. Afterwards, we are part of ESPD, European Association of Services Provider, at European level. We are engaging people to participate in Inclusion International and so on, and to discuss, and afterwards to push from international mechanism of human rights to push the government indirectly. You know, we are speaking as a and we are supporting to people to speak, and afterwards, you know, and also we support people to be part of our UN mechanism here in our country, and to participate at public consultations and so on. It's difficult, but we are trying, and also direct advocacy. The government has trust in people who developed and created the range of services here in Moldova, piloted, and I'm one of advisor of the ministry, social provider. It's a voluntary work. but it's a good that they are taking into account my views, my opinion, when we are talking about social inclusion, rights of the persons with disabilities. And I'm more than sure that the recommendation of my report will be taken into account. And about effectiveness and so on, it's a methodology of evaluation of the policy. It's if you know this methodology. If not, I will share some resources with you.
Thanks so much, Parascovia. Those are some quite some questions. Thank you so much, and thanks also for offering to share your contact. I think what we can do, if once the report becomes available, if you can send it to us, okay, we'd be happy to share it with everyone.
Of course.
And thank you everyone for staying a bit longer, but we are going to wrap up now. So first of all, thank you so much to Parascovia and to Bhargavi for coming to speak to us today. Bhargavi had to leave, but she did say goodbye in the chat. What next? So we are hoping that all of you will be interested to joining us also for other webinars. Like I said, we'll have 5. The next one is going to be on the 29th of April, focusing on the institutionalization of children and young people. If okay with everyone, we will use this, the list of people who attended today, to email you the details of that. And thank you, Nick. Nick just posted some information in the chat. Some of it is still to be confirmed, but we obviously hope to have those speakers with us. All the webinars that we'll have are on Friday at the same time. So that is 2 p.m. Central European time, different times, different time zones. So that is a time when we hope people have a bit more time as well. It's Friday, sort of after lunch. So good time to chat and exchange. So yes, we hope you can join us for the other webinars as well. If you have any suggestions or questions, please feel free to email us as well. So you will have the email once we email you the information. So thank you again to everyone, and hope to see you next time. And have a good weekend. Yes, that's it for today. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Parascovia. Bye bye.
Bye.
And thank you to everyone who attended. If I didn't say it. Bye bye.